Like the Titanic, the Peronist movement seemed indestructible, but now it has crashed. The unexpected iceberg in its path seems to be Javier Milei. In this video, we will show you how the party that dominated Argentine political history is collapsing from within, while its emblem of social justice ended up being exposed as the perfect excuse to hide a corruption that contaminated everything. Peronism, the movement that was born from the figure of General Juan Domingo Perón, and that had undoubtedly managed to be the strongest structure in Argentine political history, has seen more than 1.5 million members abandon its ranks in the last 5 years. This phenomenon is not isolated, but rather the reflection of a profound change of direction. In this report, we will show you the real reasons that are causing this enormous fracture between Peronism and Argentine society. Throughout its history, Peronism won 8 presidential elections until it was banned by the military that overthrew Perón in 1955. But even though it was banned and its leader was in exile, its power was influential in all of Argentine politics.
El peronismo es el movimiento que por más tiempo gobernó Argentina en los últimos 70 años. Pero tan importante como su tiempo en el poder es el tiempo que estuvo prohibido. El peronismo estuvo oficialmente proscripto durante 18 años y también sufrió persecución durante el último gobierno militar. Y esto es en parte lo que explica por qué domina la política argentina. Porque desde los años 40 la política acá se reduce a peronistas y antiperonistas. Así lo fue incluso cuando Perón estuvo en el exilio. De hecho, existe la teoría de que el peronismo es un sistema político en sí mismo, porque el peronismo define al gobierno cuando está en la oposición y a la oposición cuando está en el gobierno.
When the movement achieved the acclaimed return of General Perón to the country in 1973, the Peronist movement had reached the height of its power, holding absolute control of the nation. It had no less than the 3 powers of the Argentine state in the hands of members of its party and overwhelming support from 62% of the electorate who voted for the Perón presidential ticket, which included him and his new wife Isabel. They also had control of unions, social movements, grassroots organizations, and other minor groups that reached every corner of the vast country. Peronism was everything and was everywhere. He promoted policies that promoted industrialization, the expansion of the internal market, the unionization of workers, and the expansion of political, labor, cultural, and social rights. The doctrine imparted was so much and on so many fronts that it formed a particular and very characteristic idiosyncrasy with which a significant part of the Argentine population was able to identify, who felt that they owed everything to Juan Perón and his first wife Eva. The movement presented itself as synonymous with Argentine identity, and many citizens identified with it to such an extent that, in the lives of its followers, it achieved a transcendence that surpassed the strictly political and began to be projected as the expression of something that went beyond, manifesting itself in the culture itself, and at times even acquiring religious symbolism. Peronism had become a feeling.
Pero el fenómeno no es solo político. Peronismo es fútbol, es choripán, es Maradona, es el Papa Francisco, es este expresidente famoso por sus políticas neoliberales.
Cuando dicen San Perón o cuando dicen Santa Evita o Evita Santa y le dan una dimensión religiosa, es una metáfora de que lo que vivían era un milagro. Les pasó algo que jamás en su vida ni sus padres ni sus abuelos podían imaginar que les podía pasar, que es tener una vida más digna que la que tenían.
The colossal justicialist party, created in 1947 by Perón himself, came to form a whole conjunction of signifiers around the figure of its leader, forming a powerful symbolic capital that acquired such a magnitude of significance that it was expressed in all aspects of Argentine life. There was nothing, nor anyone who had more real power in Argentina than Juan Domingo Perón. Months before he died, President Perón crowned his hegemony with an ambitious integrative political proposal that he called the Argentine model for the national project, with which he intended to leave a unified vision of all previous political experiences in Argentina in a single political, economic, and social model that would condense what had been learned in a century of history and would ultimately serve to achieve the unification of all political factions and productive sectors in a single plan. That plan, plus what were called the 20 Peronist truths expressed by Perón in a speech in 1950, constituted a compendium that expressed in a simple way the objectives, values, and philosophy of Peronism, so that his followers and supporters would not run the risk of making a mistake regarding the most convenient course that their leader had envisioned. Perón marked out the path and the destiny for his followers. No one who knows history can deny that Perón left behind a defined, strong, extended, articulated structure with such power as to navigate the seas of politics without major inconveniences. He left behind bases, objectives, a doctrine, and even a philosophy of what it meant to be a Peronist. Even today, 14 provincial districts are governed by Peronists, and half of the national senators and more than a third of the national deputies identify themselves as part of the movement. Most unions are clearly identified as Peronists, and in the fields of art and national culture, the predominance of figures who are militants of this political force is notable. However, this enormous ship, considered indestructible, surprisingly came across something it did not expect. And although we all know the tragedy that the Titanic colliding with the iceberg meant for it, for Peronism, which suffered a similar impact when it encountered Javier Milei, the surprise has been so great that they still do not understand that the size of the enormous block of ice with which they are colliding was built by Peronism itself. Does this statement seem strange to you? Watch the video until the end and you will clearly understand what is happening in the seas of Argentine politics. Since the current president Javier Milei is someone who comes from outside their Peronist ecosystem, they consider him the visible enemy, and that is where they are aiming all the political artillery, but they do so because they do not fully understand that the problem is their own, it is internal, and it is within themselves. The size of the ice block that the last captains who commanded the ship collided with is larger than they imagine, and it is known that what an iceberg shows on the surface is only a part of what is hidden under the water and is what holds everything together. Under the water is everything that the Peronist movement has been hiding for many years and refuses to discuss openly. All members know it, but these are issues that are not discussed. The only truth is reality, they say, General Perón said. And the problem that the Argentine Peronist movement currently has is that they themselves are destroying all the inherited political capital, abusing the trust of the people who followed them. Even Perón himself was surprised at how his heirs were managing resources and power. This is what the former Peronist deputy Julio Barbaro, who was Secretary General of the Peronism of Capital in 1972 and a person close to the leader, told us.
Perón viene y dice, me fui dejando la Casa Rosada con 250 empleados. Vuelvo y hay 2.500. Así no se hace un país. Todo se va inflando el Estado, que el Estado que dejó el peronismo no era estatista. No era estatista. Una sola cosa, Néstor. Como está organizado el país es inviable.
The successive presidents that Peronism had were not exactly faithful and loyal to his mandate. Rather, each one used the name and legacy of the leader to do what seemed convenient to him, even blurring the doctrine itself, to the point where many believe that being a Peronist is doing what one wants, but paying tribute to the symbols of the party. The power that the movement inherited has an enormous capacity, for good and for bad.
La presencia del peronismo en los sindicatos, en los gremios, en las organizaciones de derechos humanos hace que el movimiento sea poderoso aun cuando no está en el poder. Es un hecho que los gobiernos antiperonistas nunca terminaron bien. Unos terminaron en terribles crisis económicas o políticas y otros fueron regímenes militares que persiguieron y desaparecieron disidentes. Pero en el antiperonismo hay una explicación para esto. Según los críticos, los peronistas no dejan gobernar cuando son oposición. Dicen que hacen paros, que trancan las calles, que supuestamente conspiran con mafias y sindicatos para derrocar a los gobiernos no peronistas. Y a eso atribuyen el hecho de que, al menos hasta el gobierno de Mauricio Macri, ningún gobierno no peronista terminó su mandato de manera ordenada.
Julio Barbaro, one of the last people close to Perón, clearly expressed General Perón's concern regarding the use of the legacy by his followers.
Perón no quería que fuera el peronismo un sello para que afanen los muchachos. Generación que vino después de la mía fue la generación heroica. Murieron muchos sin sentido. Después de eso vino la generación pragmática, se afanaban lo que podían. Y después yo no creo que Néstor Kirchner haya sido peronista. A ver, tengo horas y horas de diálogo con él, horas largas.
¿Qué discutían? ¿Sobre si era o no era peronista?
Discutíamos, no, eso no.
No, pero quizás usted se lo dijo en algún momento, Néstor.
No le importaba.
Uh-huh.
Digamos,
pero para vos, ¿qué era Néstor? O sea, si no era
pragmático. Nada más. Uh-huh. Pragmático total. Yo discutía con él. Yo le decía, el poder es la conciencia. Y él me decía, no, el poder es la moneda. Y yo, era un pragmático.
Uh-huh.
Politics ceased to be a vocation within the party and became the shortest path to enrich oneself by managing a budget or accessing a political position that was reached by climbing positions in the structure that in practice rewarded self-interested militancy over the capacity and training of the members. The reality is that the figures who were acquiring more power in the political structures of the party were increasingly useless, less capable people, and the only thing they had that was remarkable was a convincing oratory and excessive ambition. The concept of social justice, key in the Peronist discourse since its origin, became a tool of political control rather than a true promise of equality. While Perón's original vision sought to democratize well-being over the years, that promise was distorted by political figures who rose through the ranks in each of the vacancies that the Peronist movement offered to achieve positions of power, where they appropriated their budgets and managed them at their discretion. There are examples in all sectors and with ample evidence of corruption in economic management and perpetuation in office. The unionists grouped in the labor union have been in their positions for more than 30 years and live off the compulsory union dues that each collective labor agreement has and are increasingly far from the reality of the workers. The highest positions in each of the three levels of the state are or were in the hands of people who are increasingly less capable and more unscrupulous, with a series of Peronist presidents, governors, and mayors endowed with a level of ignorance and corruption that would be the despair of General Perón himself. Social justice in the hands of the last Peronist governments was transformed into welfare, with an omnipresent state that intervened in all aspects of citizens' lives. But behind this protective state, corruption scandals flourished. Each link in the assistance chain had its own benefit for the Peronist militant in the structure. Peronism and corruption began to go hand in hand. The privatizations of the 1990s under the presidency of Carlos Menem and the lack of transparency in public management not only undermined the credibility of the movement, but also became a mechanism to benefit the elites close to power. Peronism justified its actions under the premise of a present state that defended the most vulnerable, but in practice, the state became a corrupt machine that used public resources to perpetuate its power. As Peronism distanced itself from its original promises, the union organizations, which once led the defense of workers, also began to transform. The unions began to profit from the health of their members and to do business with private medical companies, taking advantage of the monopoly on collecting contributions. The unionists created ghost companies to hire themselves and empty the accounts. The list of legal cases against the unionists is a disgrace to the history of the movement itself. The growing disconnection between unions and workers became evident when union structures began to operate as business corporations. While union assets grew, membership fell dramatically. In some sectors, labor informality reached historic levels, showing how the movement had lost its capacity to represent its bases. Autonomous community organizations began to emerge in traditionally Peronist territories, filling the void left by the union as a representative of the workers. The old bastions of Peronism crumbled, while the movement remained trapped in its internal struggle for control of the state apparatus. Javier Milei's rise in Argentine politics, culminating in his victory in the 2023 presidential elections, was largely a reaction against the excesses of the Peronist model. Milei did not hesitate to point to social justice, so defended by Peronism, as the greatest evil that has held back Argentina's development. For Milei, this concept was nothing more than an excuse to maintain a welfare system that hid decades of corruption and clientelism. A striking example of this phenomenon was the management of the trabajo plans during the Kirchnerist governments, which, far from improving the living conditions of the poorest, were used as a tool of political control. The resources allocated to these plans ended up in the hands of political leaders, while poverty and inequality continued to increase. Milei harshly criticized this model, arguing that social justice had only served to create dependency among the most vulnerable sectors, perpetuating poverty instead of offering real opportunities for growth. According to his vision, the state should not intervene in the economic life of citizens, and it is the market that should allocate resources efficiently. The loss of the social basis of Peronism and its inability to renew its discourse before an increasingly critical society culminated in a deep crisis in the 2023 elections. Peronism found itself unable to articulate an effective response to Milei's radical discourse, which, with his promise to end the caste, channeled social discontent. The Peronist narrative of social justice and a present state, pillars of its history, was perceived by many as a burden that impeded the country's progress. Milei's proposals, focused on the reduction of the state and the liberalization of the economy, captured the imagination of young people and upper-middle sectors who had traditionally supported Peronism. This decline was reflected in the party's loss of representation in Congress and in several key provinces. Peronism, which once dominated Argentine politics, now faces the challenge of redefining its identity or losing its relevance in the new political landscape. It is often said in the realm of family businesses that the grandfather founds it, the children enjoy it, and the grandchildren ruin it. And this seems to be what is happening with the Peronist movement. While some debate whether the policies are valid, others confront the current government and all avoid recognizing the reality. They are sinking the party. Peronism is at a historic crossroads. For decades, it was the movement that articulated the demands of the popular sectors and built a narrative of social justice and equity. But today, that narrative has lost strength in the face of a society that demands concrete results and a policy free of corruption. Peronism had everything and is losing it due to its own corruption, dishonesty, selfishness, convenience, and excessive ambition. They should not blame Milei's measures. They should not blame General Perón's legacy. Both did or do everything possible to get Argentina ahead, while the parasitic caste, mostly Peronist, that lives and lived off the state hides behind noble causes to defend their businesses and those of their partners. There are officials who are not known to have any other activity than living off the state for more than 40 years, moving from position to position at the expense of taxpayers and placing relatives in other organizations so that they continue doing the same. The future of Peronism will depend on its ability to renew itself and regain the trust of voters, especially those who have migrated to political alternatives such as Javier Milei's. If it fails to reinvent itself, the movement runs the risk of being trapped in its internal contradictions and relegated to a secondary role in Argentine politics. The candidates who are fighting to preside over the still powerful Peronist party show that they are far from having learned their lesson and are heading towards choosing the worst of their crop and inevitably moving towards a great loss of seats in deputies and senators in 2025, where La Libertad Avanza, Javier Milei's new party, will take the majority of seats from him. Do you think our analysis is wrong? We'll read you in the comments.